Hi there, my name is Gary Vick. I'm a resident of Glenwood Springs, and I'm preparing this video today on my behalf and also on behalf of a group of citizens known as Friends of the Roaring Fork. Friends is a group of homeowners that own properties up and down the Roaring Fork River that have common objectives. We love the river, we take care of the river. We're probably the best stewards the river could ever have. And we are universally opposed to the riparian ordinance that's being discussed for presentation at the July 16th meeting of City Council. We're doing this format because the presentation format in City Council is different from the way it is at P&Z. In P&Z, our group have historically given me roughly 10 people have contributed their 3 minutes to me, and I have enough time to make a coherent presentation because there's a lot of materials that we need to cover with respect to the ordinance. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. It's very difficult to rebut these and present any kind of coherent organization and organized presentation together in a series of 3-minute sound bites. Now that's what we'll do at council if that's what council wants to do. But the fact of the matter is that it's pretty difficult. So I have submitted a 15-page memo to council to review. The citizens of Friends of the Roaring Fork have also, many of them, have submitted materials for you to review. Some are extremely articulate, extremely well thought out. I urge each council member to read each of these submissions carefully. We've spent a lot of time on this, and we feel like we need to have a good audience with you, and probably the best audience we're going to have is you reading the materials. So let's get started. With respect to the riparian ordinance, this amendment is an answer, and I'll refer to it as the amendment. It's the answer to a question no one has asked. It puts severe limitations on the use of our properties in exchange for no quantifiable demonstrated gain. There is no outcry for this revision by anyone. And it's not required at this time. It's just a bridge too far. It will result in devaluation of the property values of homeowners along the river, impinges the rights of homeowners, and those homeowners are causing no harms to the river in Glenwood Springs. All we want to do is use and enjoy our land. It forms the goals of well-intentioned but minority environmental proponents. Our neighbors are having dinner. If we hear a little noise, that's what they're doing. It forwards the goals of environmental proponents, including the Roaring Fork Conservancy, the River Commission, who I'll collectively refer to as the proponents, and also to a certain extent the staff of the city. The real key is that this revision and this amendment has not been subject to even a cursory cost-benefit analysis, if you can believe that, by the proponents or staff, and they seek to usurp the rights of property owners along our rivers, the collective our, yours and ours, in exchange for no demonstrated, meaningful, or quantified gain in order to forward the proponents' narrow goals. It's a pretty powerful statement. Every word of it's true. Proponents of staff have worked on this amendment for over 2 years, and there has been no meaningful outreach on the part of the city staff or proponents to solicit stakeholder input. Can you believe that? They just decided they were going to write an ordinance and not talk to anybody about it. Limited changes to the amendment have been effected by our group, Friends of the Roaring Fork, or Friends, only by appealing directly to the Glenwood Springs Planning and Zoning Commissions. And on at least one occasion, staff refused to make the changes Planning and Zoning told them to make. So we had to go back and tell them to do it again. And the commission told them to do it again, and they finally made the changes. We've also engaged a legal counsel to see if we had any legal recourse on this, and turns out we do. The amendment that's being proposed does not meet the city's own threshold for ordinance change, and I urge council members to read in detail the brief letter that our council has provided to you, you basically have no basis to pass this ordinance. It has not been properly justified and will not be, even with or without further changes. I got to tell you, it's a minefield for the city. It's a legal minefield, and if you want to go there, well, I guess you go there. Why do we care about all this? Well, I got to tell you, as residents living along the Roaring Fork in Glenwood Springs, we're just lucky. I mean, look at what's behind me. A beautiful mountain, a beautiful river. It's a magical experience. Most of us purchased our properties for the express purpose of viewing, using, accessing, and enjoying the river. We listen to the river every day. We sleep to it every night. We watch it at breakfast and at dinner. We fish in our own backyards. We watch families of fox, deer, bear, raccoon, mink, geese, ducks, hawks, and even bald eagles feed and play in the river behind us. We watch the stars by it. We picnic by it. We camp by it. We kayak and raft to our own back door. Many of us share this environment with others who have no path to access the fisherman's easement. Somebody wants to go fishing, we let them through. Lots of times they can't get to the river because the riparian environment is just too thick. We welcome boaters to come up and have lunch down by the river. We welcome bugs onto our glasses while we're trying to make a video. We live here responsibly. We care for the environment that we live in. And we are stewards of the river. Literally, we are a stone's throw from City Hall. If you look over my left shoulder, just over the bonefish, which has a Easter Island carving on the other side, is City Hall. We're very lucky, but let's be clear about something. We didn't win the lottery. Nobody gave us these properties. Most of us paid a substantial premium for these properties so that we could use, view, access, enjoy, and share the river. And I'm going to use those terms a lot. Use, view, access, enjoy, and share, because that's what the amendment's taking away from us. If you think about it, we use our backyards just like you do. Only in your case, there's no proposed amendment that would sterilize and make unusable and unmaintainable up to 50%. Started out as 90%, if you can believe that, of our backyard's most attractive features, which is the area down by the river. And all without meaningful stakeholder input, without the city demonstrating any quantifiable need for or benefit from this sterilization. I'll be using that term a lot. Quantifiable benefit. You will hear a lot of claims by the Roaring Fork Conservancy and the proponents. None have been quantified. 90% of it's arm waving. I will address later in this presentation 15 of their most common claims and rebut every single one of them. You're not facing an ordinance that would limit your ability to use and enjoy your property while simultaneously negatively impacting its value. That's why we care. So what do we want? We want you to rework the ordinance with stakeholder input. Right now, and at a minimum, we will not tolerate anything larger than a 35-foot setback, or any revision that sterilizes more than 50% of our land in the setback area. That's a pretty generous give on our part, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the current language is just unacceptable in several other areas, and excuse me, absent changes, you've got to reject this. The current language prevents trimming of existing vegetation in the setback area or construction of access paths or steps. Absent a demonstration study of some sort and possibly a permit, the wording reads, for these proposed activities, and then it lists trimming, and then it lists paths and stairs and hot springs pools. And let's stop right there. Proposed activity, I don't know why staff used that term. I was told that it's sort of used conversationally. Staff, this is a legal document. You don't write legal documents conversationally. When you say proposed activity, it suggests that I have to propose it. If I have to propose it, it means somebody has to approve it. I have talked to staff till I'm blue in the face about this, and they just don't see any problem. They think it's just fine. I'm probably not going to need a permit. They won't say I don't. And the language says infers that I might, but they don't see any problem with it. And to do those activities, you got to jump around in the ordinance. You kind of start in the middle, read it, go back up to the top, and then read through the bottom. You got to jump back up to the top, because then I have to provide evidence to the director of planning or the city engineer that the proposed activity will not degrade water quality in any fashion. So what did I just say? I said that in order to trim the riparian habitat over my shoulder, which is right back down over here, and we trim it, we don't kill it, we don't remove it, we trim it so that we can see, use, enjoy, and have access to the river. In order to trim that, I've got to show with clear and, what's the term? Clear and concise, clear and meaningful, clear and convincing, excuse me, with clear and convincing evidence to the city director that I haven't harmed water quality in any way. Who on God's green earth can do that? If I go down and I remove one leaf from one bush, haven't I arguably hurt the water quality by some 1/1,000,000th of 1/1,000,000th of 1 part per million? It's an impossible standard. And I asked a consulting engineer that does work for the city what he thought about this, and he just shook his head. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but he just shook his head and he said it's the craziest thing he's ever read. Because it could require an engineering study, but if I ask him to do an engineering study, he would not be able to show with an engineering study that trimming vegetation would not degrade water quality in some minor way. So I claim what the city has done is completely sterilized 50% of my land. I can neither use it, have access to it. I can't even trim it. I've got to let it grow 10 feet tall so that the view you're seeing over my shoulder becomes completely obscured. I'm sorry, we just don't intend to do that. Council, you're going to be told that staff has written an interpretation memorandum that interprets how this is all going to be handled. Well, let me tell you something. They can change that memorandum at any time, and you need to be able to have clear documentation on what it is you're voting on. If it takes a lot of caveats and explanation and 20 minutes of staff going, well, you know, that's not the intent, or what we really meant to say is this, then you need to rewrite the ordinance. It's just that simple. And in our documentation, we have given you several versions of revised ordinance that will, revised wording that will accomplish these goals. What you've gotten right now is a convoluted mess that nobody seems to be able to figure out what it means. So you've got to kill the ordinance in its current form, or send staff back to rewrite it. But I'll tell you what you really should do. You should seriously consider denying the amendment altogether and instruct the staff to propose a comprehensive education program for council's approval. The Roaring Fork Conservancy states that education is key to achieving objectives. But you know what? No such education program has been proposed, attempted, or tried. Such a program has been used successfully in Vail, where the city subsidizes the design of riparian landscape. Not the land, they don't subsidize the landscaping itself, but they'll help you with the design if you want to come in and improve your property down by the river. Friends is more than happy to work with and learn from the proponents. We think the River Commission and the Roaring Fork Conservancy have a lot to add, and they can teach us good ways to enhance our properties with riparian plants. But I'll tell you what we won't do. We will not be dictated by them through ordinances which are not needed, for which no need has been demonstrated, and for which no outreach has occurred. If you didn't hear that, you need to play it again. Let's talk about some of the claims that the proponents have made. As part of their presentation package, you will see hundreds of pages of why the riparian environment is important, and we completely agree with that. We have to have a healthy riparian environment along our riverbanks. The fact of the matter is we do, and they have shown no evidence to suggest that we don't. They've shown no evidence regarding what the ordinance will accomplish and what will be lost if we don't pass the ordinance. That general statement aside, let's go through some of their specific concerns. They want to prevent destruction of habitat within Glenwood Springs, riparian habitat. So do we. But let me tell you something, there's no better stewards of the river than those who live on it. We have more vested interest in keeping the river healthy and clean than most, certainly than you. There's no meaningful destruction of riparian habitat by homeowners within the city limits of Glenwood Springs. Now, proponents fear that unscrupulous developers will come in and raise wide swaths of riparian habitat as they've done in places between here and Aspen, destroy a lot of habitat to build houses. But I'd like you to ask staff how much undeveloped land remains in Glenwood Springs, and you'll see it's virtually zip. It's impossible for a developer to come in and develop undeveloped lands and raise habitat if there's no undeveloped land left. So, I'm sorry, what are the proponents afraid of here? Frankly, it's the city that seems to destroy large swaths of land on their properties. 27th Street Bridge project, you've got an egregious cut upriver where you put the power lines in and you bulldoze all the way from the street to the river. It just looks horrible. And I was talking to the landowners over there one day and I was kind of chewing them out about it, and they said, well, the city did that. They did that when they put their cotton picking power lines in. Oh, and then there's Two Rivers Park. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. Tell you what, put this video on hold and go to Google Earth and observe the shoreline. Just go to Google Earth and look up Glenwood Springs, and the satellite photos still show what Two Rivers Park looked like before the redevelopment. Go ahead and do it right now. Then tomorrow, I want you to walk down the new trail by the Colorado and see how much of the original riparian habitat is left. Now, I'm just kidding, I'll save you a trip. Most of it's all gone. As stewards of the river, we are outraged by this, and we bristle at proposed legislation against homeowners and our lands. When we are the best stewards of the river that the river can ever have, and the city acts like Attila the Hun. The proponents also want to prevent redevelopment of existing homes, such as this one. When they're redeveloped someday, they would like for habitat not to be destroyed. This actually occurred on a property just south of the city limits on the east bank of the Roaring Fork River, just outside city limits in Garfield County. And believe me, we want to prevent that too. I don't know if you have, but I've actually walked over and looked at that property. And boy, no one condones what was done there. The vegetation was cut from the road to the river's edge. It was egregious. But here's the rub, and it's a big one. The property owner was likely in violation of the Garfield County setback ordinance. And he would certainly have been in violation of Glenwood Springs' existing setback ordinance if the existing Glenwood ordinance applied at that site. Now, of course it doesn't, but if it did, you would have everything you need to go after that guy and make him put it back the way it should have been put back. But what did the proponents do? Did they urge Garfield County to enforce the ordinance? No. If they did, they weren't successful. What they decided to do was go after homeowners along the Roaring Fork River in Glenwood Springs who have done nothing wrong. They chose to seek passage of additional laws rather than encourage enforcement of existing laws. The Roaring Fork Conservancy touts this crusade in their latest annual report. I was successful in business before I retired in Glenwood Springs, and I'll tell you, that's good for business. It really helps donations more if you think about it, if they can say that they affected an entire town. And look at the ordinance we made all these homeowners do. Look at all these things, rather than go after the one guy that really broke the rules. It helps donations more to unnecessarily impact an entire city than it does to discipline the single egregious property owner, even though homeowners in that city are doing nothing wrong. I'm calling you out on this, Roaring Fork Conservancy. Glenwood's existing setback ordinance is sufficient to protect against activities of this sort. The amendment adds nothing to the city's ability to enforce such actions. Proponents tout the benefits of a healthy riparian system and infer that the amendment is needed to keep our ecosystem healthy. What you will see in the materials is the importance of a healthy riparian ecosystem. We agree completely. We agree completely. Where we disagree is that the amendment is required to achieve this. Such an ecosystem already exists. Proponents have failed to show that a healthy riparian system does not exist in Glenwood Springs. And let's talk about this for a second. The Roaring Fork drainage is over 70 miles long. 4 of it are in Glenwood Springs. And if you wanted to add and make the 70 more, you could add the tributaries, the Frying Pan and the Crystal and 3 Mile Creek and a lot of other places. Any problems with this river with respect to its water quality or temperature or anything else have much more to do with the first 66 miles upstream than they do with the last 4 through Glenwood Springs. You know, at a public meeting we held by friends, that was held by friends of the Roaring Fork, on September 19, 2019, we discussed this and a lot of other things, and it was attended by members of the River Commission. That was our outreach, not theirs. We've never been outreach to at all. At that meeting, the former chairman of the River Commission stated, and this is key, the Roaring Fork is actually in pretty good shape. We were going, what are you doing this for? What do you need this for? And he goes, yeah, well, I'll grant you the Roaring Fork is actually in pretty good shape. End of story, period, full stop. You don't need this amendment to fix anything. Nothing's wrong. Proponents have not identified meaningful problems in the river system in Glenwood Springs, that the amendment would rectify. They haven't done it. The science-based Roaring Fork Conservancy has not provided one shred of science that shows what's wrong with the river and how the amendment would fix it. Now, there are some things wrong with the river. The temperature of the Roaring Fork is rising, and occasionally we get some algae plumes, and those aren't good. The Roaring Fork is actually on a state watch list for temperatures, but it's just barely on that list. It remains a gold medal stream and wildlife flourishes on it. I mean, I should know, I live here. You should see the wildlife that we see on a daily basis. You may see some tonight. The problem with the proponents just saying, oh my God, the river temperature is rising. Yeah, it is. And the problem is that the amendment will do nothing to lower the water temperatures or prevent those algae plumes. The amendment will do nothing to lower water temperatures and prevent algae plumes. And the proponents have given you no evidence and any quantified, objective, verifiable data to suggest otherwise. Whatever has happened until the water temps is dominated by the first 66 miles of the drainage and the rivers that flow into it. not the last 4 through Glenwood Springs. Heck, the snow is warmer. There's less of it. The temperature of the planet is rising. It's global warming. Maybe the RFC's heard of it. Proponents have not demonstrated that the amendment would materially address any of this. They haven't done it. And until they do, you can't use this as an excuse to willy-nilly pass an ordinance. There's a lot of discussion about the secondary water intake on the Roaring Fork. It needs to be protected because the primary source is at no name, and if we get a fire up there, we're going to have to take water out of the fork. And the inferences with no proof, with no data, with no science, the inference is that the amendment is needed to protect the intake and reduce costs if the secondary source is used. The naked claim that this is a completely naked claim, and it's not substantiated in any way. According to the city's most recent RADA reports, which I have read, have you read them? Has the Roaring Fork Conservancy read them? Has the River Commission read them? Because I have. And those reports show that the city's water supply meets applicable specs, as does its drinking water. There are no notes regarding any inadequacy of the intake on the Roaring Fork River. The amendment will not fix a problem that does not exist or fix an unidentified problem in the future. Unsupported, untrue arguments cannot be used as justification for the amendment. And yet, our mayor, in a lunch and learn just last week, stated that he was concerned about the intake on the Roaring Fork, and he was glad, or words to this effect, that the timing of the lunch and learn, the purpose of which was to inform viewers as to the importance of a healthy riparian environment, he said the timing was perfect for that. We agree a healthy riparian environment is critical. We have one, and no one has shown that we don't. Here's a good one. The city claims that this ordinance is necessary to ensure that the city meets more restrictive EPA stormwater runoff provisions that may go into place when our population exceeds 10,000. In fact, this is used as one of the legal justifications for the amendment. It's a completely false argument. The amendment will not materially affect the city's ability to meet any revised EPA requirement that may or may not go into effect. The amendment has no legal basis as a result. Let me tell you something about riparian habitat. It does a great job at filtering water and pollutants, but only when the water goes through it. Glenwood Springs encompasses 5.7 square miles, and roughly 95% of that area is drained not through the riparian environment, but by a sewer system that collects water from yards, driveways, roofs, parking lots, and it collects oil, debris, trash, unmentionables from the bowels of the city, and deposits all of this effluent into the streets, and then sewers, then culverts, ditches, then pipes, and finally and unceremoniously dumps it without any treatment or riparian filtration of any kind directly into the river. That's what happens to 95% of the storm wastewater that falls on Glenwood Springs. Members of the council, unless you live on the river as friends do, you pollute the river to a much greater extent than any of us do. It is completely disingenuous to state that further regulating 5% of the runoff that is already being filtered will have a meaningful impact on wastewater quality when the city is blatantly ignoring 95% of the water which is completely unfiltered. You're actually using this as justification for the amendment. Our lawyers could take you apart so fast it would make your head spin. For staff and proponents to use this as a justification for the amendment is egregious, It's disingenuous. It's an outright misrepresentation. It's a lie. Proponents claim that grass is the worst thing you can put next to a river. Well, the RFC has a study that they provided that I made a copy of. It's called Riparian Buffer Zones, Functions and Recommended Widths. And I reproduced in my materials, which I hope you'll read, I produced a table that shows grass, shrubs, and trees. Here's some benefits, and their study weights those benefits. And here's what it says. When the grasses are compared to trees and shrubs against these 5 benefits, grass has the best sediment trapping, the best filtration of pesticides, and the best flood conveyance. It ranks second with respect to soluble pesticides and stream bank erosion. In no case does grass come in last at anything. You can see that in the table. It's worth noting that the largest strip of grass recently planting along the river can be found, want to take a guess where? Two Rivers Park, courtesy of the city. Apparently even the city believes that grasses are not the worst thing you can plant along a river. Proponents state that Glenwood Springs is dependent on tourism and river use, and they infer that the amendment is needed to preserve this and improve aesthetics. But they provide no data to support it. On any given weekend, hundreds of rafts, you've seen people floating behind me right here, hundreds of rafts and kayaks pass our properties, the properties of mine that I own, and the properties of Friends of the Roaring Fork. Not one has ever, and I mean ever, said anything negative about the aesthetics of the river or the property. Other members of Friends of the Roaring Fork report the same thing. To the contrary, several times a day, people will offer beautiful yard or I love your place. Most come by looking at my property and our Easter Island wood carving, which is on the other side of the bonefish back there. Most of them are looking at the property and the Easter Island carving, not at the sewage treatment plant across the way, which has perfect riparian habitat. Aesthetics are in the eye of the beholder. Friends of the Roaring Fork do our part. And yet the proponents say they infer that the amendment is needed to improve aesthetics. Okay. Environmental groups support the amendment, and I guess they would, wouldn't they? It's not their property values and property rights and their use of the river that flows over our lands that are being trifled with. It's not theirs, it's ours. What are they getting from the amendment? They can't tell you, and it's actually nothing. Homeowners along the river are doing nothing wrong, and the amendment will not fix any of the proponents' purported ills with the river. You know, in a recent letter to the Commission, Trout Unlimited said, the Roaring Fork River is really in sorry shape. This is to the P&Z Commission, or words to that effect. I read the letter at the Commission meeting. And that was right before the author, a couple of sentences later, said, the Roaring Fork was one of the best fishing streams in the country. Again, or words to that effect. And I'll say to you exactly what I said to the Commission. So what is it? Is it sorry? Or the best? You know, the author floats the river a couple of times a year and he writes a letter. Members of Friends can be found on the river every day. We live on the river, we protect it, and we paid premiums to do so. I'll put our stewardship and our river premiums up against Trout Unlimited stewardship and their 50-cent stamp any day of the week. They don't write our code. We write the code. Although there's some question about that in council's mind. Council doesn't really like citizens trifling with the code for this city ordinance. Well, that's too bad. It affects us. and we're going to trifle with it until the city gets it right. The proponents talk about needing a healthy riparian habitat to support the fishing industry, and they again infer that the amendment is required to maintain it. But again, we all agree that fishing and tourism are industries that we applaud in Glenwood. I saw something the other day where someone estimated that the valley gets $1.3 billion a year because of fishing on the frying pan. That seems like a fantastic number, but I would not be surprised if it's true. But here's the problem. The proponents have not quantified the extent to which the amendment will increase these industries or the extent to which failing to pass the amendment will degrade them. To the contrary, there is no degradation to the fishing industry caused by homeowners along the river. We are generally the best stewards the river could ever have. The statement made by the proponents is completely general, and it's not analytically supported by anything. It's just arm waving. And I'll tell you something. We got the best fishing hole right over my shoulder on the whole river. And only about half the fishermen know about it. Especially when the water's up in the spring, it's just ripping through there. You can pull trout out all day long, faster than you can unhook them and let them go. It's just amazing. Proponents say that a healthy riparian environment reduces erosion. Well, of course it does. And most private homeowners along the Roaring Fork River have sought to mitigate erosion on their properties when and where it has occurred. Some erosion is natural to be expected, but we do our part to minimize it because it's our land. Examination from Google Earth or Red Mountain or just by floating the river will show some areas that are primarily city lands where erosion has occurred, but these do not require a broad brush amendment to correct. Rather, specific actions can be taken in specific areas, such as the confluence at 3 Mile Creek. The National Forest Service knows how to deal with erosion and overuse. They temporarily close trails all the time for revegetation. They do it on a routine basis to allow for regrowth and erosion control. The River Commission should do something like this. They are terrific at projects like this. I'll tell you what they're not very good at is writing code for the city. Let the River Commission go up to 3 Mile, and they're already working on a project to do it. Let's deal with that problem one area and one problem at a time, not with a broad brush amendment that takes away homeowners' rights. Now, this ordinance started out with sterilization of 90% of my riparian area. 90%. The proponents wanted to leave me with, on my 75-foot lot, with a 7.5-foot strip to get down to the river. Well, let me tell you something. We have 100% control of the riparian area right now. And the proponents are going to come in and say, well, you reduced it to 50. The homeowners are going to destroy 50% of the riparian habitat. Well, that's what non-scientific, non-numeric, arm-waving environmentalists do. I'm an environmentalist. But by God, I use science to back it up. Homeowners are not going to destroy 50% of the riparian habitat. We haven't done that for decades. We've owned all of it. We haven't destroyed 50% of it. A few people may want to enhance their view, use, and enjoyment of the river that they paid extra to be alongside of, especially those buying properties that are completely overgrown. If we have time in the video, I'll take you down and give you an example of a homeowner down here whose property is completely overgrown. He passed away, the property is for sale. Somebody's probably going to buy that and actually want to view, see, access, and use and enjoy the river. And to deny them this right makes that property less valuable. If you didn't get what I said, rewind it and play it again. Not allowing people to do reasonable clearing on their land makes their properties less valuable. But in my case, I've already got a small clearing down here. So if this ordinance goes into effect, you've just made his property less desirable and less valuable, and you've made my property more desirable. So my property went up and his property went down. How dare you transfer wealth from him to me? That may be okay with some members of council, but it's not okay with Friends of the Roaring Fork. It's completely unfair. How dare you transfer wealth from my neighbor to me? You raise your hand on this and you will lose your next election, guaranteed. Let's continue to talk about this 50%. You know, the city lists 50 odd private homes along the Roaring Fork. Now, nobody believes it's that few, but that's what the city records show. And if each one cleared, say, a 30-foot strip by the river, which is kind of what we have cleared down here, and they won't do that. People either already have a clearing, or they like the riparian habitat the way it is, they like the vegetation the way it is. If you pass this law and allow citizens to use 50% of something that we have 100% use of right now, we're not going to go destroy 50% of it. Are there too many marijuana shops in this town for you guys? But if everybody did, let's say everybody on the river cleared a 30-foot strip, that would be 50 properties times 30 feet is 1,500 feet. Okay, that's about a quarter of a mile. Now there's 4 miles of riverbank in the town. River in the town and 2 banks, so there's 8 miles of riverbank. And when you do the arithmetic, that's about 1,500 feet over 8 miles, 52.80 per mile. It's 42,000 feet. If, and this won't happen, but if every homeowner cleared a 30-foot swath through the riparian habitat that he's never done before, you would destroy only about 3.5% of the riparian habitat in the city of Glenwood Springs, leaving 96.5% of the available riverbank completely sterilized. Now I got to tell you, 96.5% out of your 100% goal is enough for even the most overzealous environmentalists to be happy with, even the proponents. Frankly, the only place that 1,500 feet of riparian habitat has recently been destroyed is, Two Rivers Park, courtesy of the city. Thank you very much. You know, when I was at P&Z meeting, they were still talking about this 90%. And I said, excuse me? You want to sterilize 90% of my backyard? Potentially blocking our view, use, and access and enjoyment of the river, excuse me? How about instead we sterilize 90% of your backyard's best features for no demonstrated gain? Oh, well, you're not doing anything wrong. Well, that's too bad. You might. Or how about in city hall chambers, they've got 10 beautiful windows out there in that yard to the left of where the council members sit. How about I paint 9 out of 10 of them? Because you really don't want to look out 10 windows. You don't want to have use of 100% of your windows. How about I decide for you, since I know better than you, that you really only need one of those windows? Well, if you'll send me an email and tell me which window to paint or to leave unpainted, I'll be happy to do that. But I proposed painting over the other 9. I couldn't get the commission to tell me which one they wanted unpainted, so I never did it. Or maybe we should do 90% of the windows on your house. You know, on a 75-foot lot, allowing us to clear 10% down through the riparian habitat through the river, is it even enough for more than 2 people to properly social distance? Are you kidding me? Let's be clear. Our lawyers have made it clear to us that your ordinance is without a legal basis, and as such, the city is unwarranted in restricting 1 square inch of our riparian habitat. If you don't believe us, read the lawyer's letter again. For Friends to even consider allowing the city to restrict 50% of our riparian habitat is a blessing. You need to appreciate that. But you know what? Most of us are kind of environmentalists too. And 50% kind of has a ring to it. You know, one for us, one for you. We don't owe you one. And you can't take one. But let's be perfectly clear. If we consider giving you 50% restriction on our habitat, it's a gift. And we will not tolerate 1 square inch less than 50%. I've had a lot of my people in this group, in Friends of the Roaring Fork, get really mad at me. They don't want to restrict anything. You make it more than 50%, well, just look, just don't even think about it. The proponents have used as an excuse to adopt this ordinance that other municipalities are adopting similar ordinances. And this is simply untrue. And even if it were true, it's a childish argument that cannot be used to justify an ordinance. Every time your kid comes home and says, well, Johnny got a new bike, do you buy him another one? Well, apparently that's what the city does with these kind of ordinances. But the fact of the matter is that it's just not true. The Roaring Fork Conservancy went out and did a spot comparison of ordinance found in nearby municipalities and counties, and it's presented in your materials. And I presented another table on that, also in the materials. But the problem is the Roaring Fork Conservancy comparison did not include municipalities downstream from Glenwood Springs for whom no outcry regarding water quality has been heard. And they included counties, which frankly is not appropriate because municipalities and counties they're completely different. Municipalities have much greater density, diversity of land use than do counties. Counties are much more rural. They're more agricultural in nature. They require different land use criteria. If you don't believe me, drive along Midland Avenue and then take a drive out to Grand Junction and see if there's any difference. Some individual landowners in nearby counties have more riverfront frontage than the 50 stakeholders of Friends of the Roaring Fork combined. And they're agricultural in nature, many of them. They have widespread use of fertilizers, pesticides, and there's a lack of drainage that dictates larger setbacks that are appropriate in counties and not appropriate in urban settings. The bottom line, counties need different setbacks than do municipalities. It's just that simple. And yet, the Roaring Fork Conservancy uses counties in their comparison. So what I did, because I didn't like their comparison, is I did another one for you. And it's in your materials. The comparison does not include counties. I spoke with planners in each municipality listed, and there's 10 municipalities, all of whom indicated that their municipalities have some jurisdiction along or near waterways or bodies of water. It doesn't capture every riverfront municipality in the state, but it captures a much better picture of where Glenwood stands in comparison to its neighbors than does the RFC comparison, which included counties and frankly appeared to have cherry-picked some of the data. I want you to look at the table in the presentation that I gave you. 6 of the 10 municipalities reviewed have no riparian setbacks of any kind. Only one, Basalt, applied vegetation limitations retroactively to existing homeowners. Those municipalities without setbacks saw no need for them. And indeed, there's no demonstrated need for revised setbacks in Glenwood Springs. The bottom line is that Glenwood Springs does not lag behind the majority of its neighboring municipalities in the protection of water resources. And if enacted, the amendment would be one of the most restrictive ordinances with respect to existing homeowners and their lands. Even if none of this were the case, there's no need to keep up with the Joneses simply to keep up with the Joneses. That doesn't work when your kid wants a new bike. It doesn't work with the city. Friends Council have shown that the amendment has no legal basis because this requirement and other requirements for ordinance change have not been met. Boy, the things you guys do to try to justify ordinances. I love this one. Proponents have stated that the amendment will not decrease property values along the river and may actually increase them. You know, I have so successfully rebutted this argument at commission meetings that the proponents refuse to talk about it anymore. They just never even bring it up. There's only two people that I've seen bring it up recently. The mayor in the Lunch and Learn and the mayor pro tem the last time I spoke with her. So for their benefit, I'll summarize the rebuttal I've used at P&Z here. The proponents based their statements largely on the results of a statistical study performed by Dr. Brian Milbank of Cleveland State University. It was performed on a fee basis on behalf of the Chagrin River Watershed Partners, a watershed group that is similar to the RFC. I think one of them copied the other one because you go to their websites, they're almost clones of each other. The study claims that setbacks enhance property values. That's what Mr. Mickelback said. Well, you know, I'm a degreed engineer and then I turned CFO, and I've taken both undergraduate and graduate statistics classes, and this claim just doesn't ring true to me. So I did something that the Roaring Fork Conservancy did, and the Roaring Fork Conservancy did not do, the proponents did not do, that council members who tout this study have not done. I actually read the damn thing. And I reviewed it, and it is seriously flawed. In a nutshell, Dr. Mickelbank compared homes in the Chagrin River Watershed Valley area with and without setbacks. And sure enough, he found that homes with setbacks sold for more money than homes without setbacks. Wow! If we just put a setback on our land, our home will be worth more, right? Well, not exactly. The vast majority of homes with setbacks are the ones that were also on the water. You found very few homes on the water that didn't have setbacks, and you found very few homes with setbacks that weren't on the water. The variables could not be separated. And then they did a survey of homeowners. And Dr. Mickelback states that homeowners on the water were generally completely unaware that the setbacks even existed when they bought their properties. It makes it a little hard, don't you think, for them to have paid more or less for homes with or without setbacks when they didn't even know that the setbacks existed. How can you pay more for something if you don't know it's there? The reason that homes with setbacks cost more was because they were on the water, not because they had setbacks. It's just that simple. Think of it this way. You may not know this, and I don't know it because believe me, I don't own one of these, but many people don't know that Ferraris have little special Ferrari toolkits in their trunks. And if you were to do a statistical study on cars, and you put in the variable of, does it have a Ferrari toolkit in the trunk, or does it not have a Ferrari toolkit in the trunk, you would see a strong correlation in price between cars with that toolkit in the trunk and cars without the toolkit. But the reason the prices are higher is because they're Ferraris, not because of the toolkit. And the reason those homes are more expensive is because they're on the water. Oh, well, Mr. Vick, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, you're right. So don't believe me. I've included in your package an email trail that Dr. Mickelbank and I exchanged in which he admits to this flaw in his study. He even talks about it on page 15 of the study, if any of you guys would actually read the study. Just to be clear, I also got a letter from Dr. Elizabeth Poulos. She's a professor of statistics at Colorado Mountain College in Summit County. And she reviewed the study, and she concluded the same thing that I did. And let me tell you, this woman is bright, intelligent. She has more degrees than a thermometer. And she found the same issue with the study that I did. Here's the reality. Rather than increase our property values, the originally proposed 90% sterilization of the setback area would reduce property values due to the fact that we would lose most of our access, view, use, and enjoyment of the river. We'd still get to enjoy the trains going by, and we paid extra for that too. 50% sterilization will reduce our property values as well. Now, in my case, I paid a 28% premium for the access, view, use, and enjoyment of the river. I really didn't pay anything extra for the train. I hope you can hear the train, because if you can't hear the train, it's not a very good joke. But I paid a 28% premium for my property, and that equates to about $100,000 on my modest little property. And there's 50-odd homeowners along the river according to the city. Now, I'm an ex-engineer, I can do math. Most of those homes are worth more than mine. Their premiums are probably more, but there's at least a $5 million reduction in property values, perhaps double that, if homes are hit with a $100,000 reduction in value because of not being able to use, access, see, view, and enjoy the river. And yet the proponents can compute no offsetting benefit of comparable magnitude. Indeed, they can present no cost-benefit study. I think I know why. I think it's because they don't care. It's not their property that's being devalued. Boy, that's really not very good. Lastly, the proponents talk about a study, and I'm not going to get into this very much, but it's a study that the RFC presents, and it talks about backyard development and creep of riparian vegetation. Some landowners have cleared, I'm paraphrasing, access down the hill that may disrupt riparian function, and if copied, could result in extensive loss of riparian habitat. None of that's been verified, documented, quantified in any way. And nothing has been presented to say that if that hadn't occurred, the temperature of the river would be 0.002 degrees Celsius higher and the algae plumes would be 2% lower. But it goes on to say that public education is a key component for addressing these concerns. And again, unlike programs in Vail and other river municipalities, no such education has been offered to residents by the city or the proponents. The fact of the matter is that there is no overt destruction of habitat occurring along the banks of the Roaring Fork. Education should be tried to address these concerns, not an overbearing ordinance. Friends of the Roaring Fork is willing and eager to learn from the proponents. We will not be dictated by them. So there you have it, really. I mean, the question is the impact of the river here bad enough to require cutting-edge, yet vague, restrictive municipal legislation that has not been shown to be necessary, that reduces property values and solves no identified problems, that other cities are not adopting, and that has no legal basis for implementation. Friends of the Roaring Fork believes it does not. So with that, I'm going to sign off. I'll also submit a short video where I walk through my neighbors' yards and show you how overgrown they can become if we're not allowed to clear some of the vegetation. Thank you. We urge you to disapprove the ordinance in its current form and include stakeholder input in a revision of this ordinance. Thank you.